The foundational stress readings spiked to critical levels. The moment I realized the timber support beams beneath the Blackwood farm weren't rotting, they were breathing. I am Arthur Fischer, lead structural engineer, contracted to survey this abandoned agrarian settlement. Initial seismic scans indicated standard subsidence, but the acoustic resonance tests reveal a hollow, expansive network of anomalies directly beneath the main concrete slab. The local laborers refused to enter the perimeter. I brought the stray barn cat, Dusty, inside to manage the vermin, but the animal has remained entirely motionless for 40 minutes. It sits in the center of the room, staring fixedly at the blank north-facing wall. Pupils dilated to the absolute margins. Measurement anomaly noted at 1400 hours. I deployed the laser rangefinder to calculate the internal dimensions of the root cellar. The digital readout returned a depth of 23 meters. This is an architectural impossibility. The original blueprints outline a standard 2-meter foundation. I recalibrated the optics. The beam dispersed into static fracturing as if hitting dense particulate matter or a severe electromagnetic distortion. My camera equipment is failing. The LCD screen displays heavy interference and horizontal tearing whenever pointed toward the tree line. At precisely 14,115 hours, the primary halogen work lights died. The backup generator did not engage. In the sudden darkness, Dusty emitted a low, guttural hiss that sounded entirely mechanical and bolted up the stairs. I activated my flashlight. The north-facing wall was no longer bare concrete. It was overgrown with intricate spiraling organic matter resembling woven branches and elongated, multi-jointed limbs. I approached to extract a core sample. As the masonry drill made contact, the surface yielded with the consistency of soft tissue. A pressurized black, viscous fluid leaked from the puncture, smelling of ozone and ancient soil. My audio recorder's decibel meter peaked, capturing a rhythmic low-frequency pulse. Local municipal records vaguely reference a 17th century sect that offered sacrifices to an entity known as the Watchman. I dismissed this as primitive folklore, irrelevant to engineering, but as the black fluid pools into geometric sigils, my peripheral vision is flooded with visual artifacting. Tall, disproportionately stretched shadows manifest at the edge of the flashlight's beam, forcing a photograph yielded only stark white noise and an elongated silhouette standing directly behind me. Immediate evacuation is required, but the door is now sealed by pale, fibrous roots. My tungsten-tipped oscillating saw shattered upon contact with the primary root mass, scattering jagged shrapnel across the floor. The fibrous material at the exit point did not merely resist the blade, it absorbed the kinetic energy, hardening into a calcified, bone-like substance that emitted a high-frequency whine. Entry log 14235 hours. Egress is currently impossible via the primary structural opening. I have been forced to retreat further into the sub-basement as the ceiling height in the kitchen is beginning to contract. Structural integrity is failing in a manner inconsistent with any known load-bearing laws. The walls are migrating inward at a rate of 4 millimeters per minute. Dusty is no longer hissing. The cat has ascended to the top of a leaning pantry shelf and is now meticulously grooming its paws. Despite the viscous black fluid dripping from the overhead joists, the animal's detachment is statistically improbable given the acoustic stress. I attempted to lure the creature down, but as I approached, the feline shadow on the wall detached itself from its physical form. The shadow cat elongated, its neck stretching toward the ceiling in a jerky, frame-by-frame motion that mirrored the visual artifacting on my digital HUD. My heart rate is sustained at 115 BPM. Update 104,570. Log entry 15 hours. The fibers constricting my lower extremities exhibited a neuroreactive response when pierced. Withdrawing with a wet, sucking sound, I have successfully retreated from the cellar's primary aperture. But the structural layout of the Blackwood farmhouse has shifted into a non-Euclidean configuration. The corridor extending from the cellar door now measures approximately 60 meters, despite the exterior dimensions of the house being only 12 meters in length. Digital interference is compounding. My head-mounted camera is capturing intermittent frames of a dense forest interior superimposed over the wooden walls. Dusty has moved further into this distorted hallway. The animal's gait is now unnatural, its hind legs dragging slightly as if the local gravity has increased or the floor surface has become adhesive. I observed the cat pause to swat at a floating particulate, not dust, but a suspended fragment of calcified bone. My digital barometer has plummeted to 23 hectopascals, a pressure drop that should be physically impossible within an Earth-based atmosphere. I am experiencing a severe auditory buzzing, consistent with high-frequency acoustic weaponry or proximity to a massive electromagnetic source. Significant architectural anomaly documented at 130 hours. I have reached what should be the dining room, but the floor has been replaced by a vertical drop into a vast forest clearing. Trees made of bleached human vertebrae rise from the floor and pierce through the ceiling. Standing among these monolithic growths is the Watchman. The entity is approximately 3 meters tall, possessing no discernible facial features or clothing. Only a smooth alabaster skin that seems to absorb the light from my LED torch. Its arms, elongated and ending in sharp, spindly digits, were reaching into a jagged hole in the ceiling, directly into the bedroom where I left my primary surveying equipment. The watchman turned toward my position with a movement so fluid it bypassed the perception of my own visual cortex. In the resulting camera static, I saw 23 distinct shadows detaching from the skeletal trees, all converging on my heat signature. Dusty emitted a sound that was not a meow, but a perfect vocal mimicry of my own voice screaming for help. I have no choice but to descend into the vertebral forest. The hallway behind me has completely fused into a solid mass of heaving wet timber. The structural integrity of reality itself is now compromised. The myrocent of the vertebral forest is a chemical assault, a mixture of wet iron and stagnant rot that my industrial grade respirator is failing to filter. Entry log 1 I have successfully descended into the clearing. Though descended is a relative term in a space where gravity feels like a suggestion rather than a physical law. The ground beneath my boots is not soil, but a compressed strata of discarded surveyor equipment and thousands of blurred Polaroid photographs, all depicting the same tall, faceless silhouette, standing at the edge of various tree lines across the century. My audio recorder is picking up a rhythmic scratching sound originating from inside the bone trees themselves, as if something is trying to claw its way out of the calcium. My localized sensor array is reporting a total collapse of standard physics. At exactly 1555 hours, I discovered a Leica total station tripod, partially submerged in a pool of the black viscous fluid. The serial number TX 992 is an exact match for the unit currently strapped to my primary equipment pack. The metal is pitted with age, looking as if it has been exposed to the elements for decades. Yet the digital display still flickers with my own last recorded coordinates from the morning. This suggests a localized temporal loop, or a reality folding event triggered by the Watchman's proximity. The architectural intent of this space is becoming clear. It is a digestive system designed to process linear time and human history into static, unchangeable matter. Dusty has ascended a spire of fused humor, his movements now entirely devoid of feline grace. He looks down at me from a height of 4 meters, his jaw unhinging to a width that should be anatomically impossible for a domestic short hair. Instead of a cat's cry, he emits a rhythmic sequence of high-pitched electronic tones, a perfect vocalization of the binary code used by my surveying software. The Watchman has repositioned. It now stands exactly 23 centimeters behind the range of my peripheral vision. I cannot see it directly, but my internal monologue is being replaced by a crushing white noise static that pulses in time with the entity's unseen movements. At 1610 hours, the bone trees began to weep. The black fluid is no longer leaking. It is spraying from the pores of the vertebrae in high-pressure jets. My hands are beginning to elongate, the skin turning the same porcelain white as the forest around me. I am no longer surveying the anomaly. The anomaly is integrating my biological data into the floor plan of the house. The watchman's long, tapering fingers are finally reaching for my shadow.
Log entry 16 entry 係 leaky entries is swelling. My radius and ulna have elongated by an estimated 15%. The skin stretching over the bone with the translucent quality of vellum. I have retreated into a hollowed-out spire of calcified ribs to avoid the watchman's direct line of sight. If such a concept applies to a creature without ocular organs, the internal volume of this bone tower is far larger than its external diameter, a spatial distortion that my laser rangefinder now measures as a recursive loop. Every measurement I take returns the number 23, regardless of the direction the beam is pointed. The digital interface is bleeding, the liquid crystal leaking out of the casing like the black bile from the floorboards. The environmental conditions have shifted to a state of total sensory static. The sound of Dusty's vocalizations has transitioned from electronic mimicry into a low-frequency hum that vibrates my very teeth. The cat, or the entity currently occupying its biological shell, is now perched directly above my head, its tail transformed into a prehensile pale cord that dangles before my face. It isn't fur anymore. It's a fine, white fiber, identical to the roots that sealed the farmhouse door. At 16:35 hours, the watchman began to manifest through the walls of my shelter. It does not move through space. It simply appears in successive frames of reality, closer with every blink of my failing eyes. Its limbs are impossibly thin, like polished marble wire, and its torso is a hollow cavity filled with shifting gray smoke. I attempted to discharge my industrial flare to create a thermal barrier. The magnesium burned with a violet hue, illuminating 1,000 identical tall figures standing perfectly still in the forest of bone. They are not duplicates. They are temporal echoes of the same entity, occupying every second of my future and past. Simultaneously, the pressure in my cranium is peaking at 230 kilopascals. My thoughts are no longer my own. They are being overwritten by a technical manual for a structure that has not yet been built. a cathedral of marrow and static. The watchman's hand, a sprawling lattice of white bone, is currently hovering 2 millimeters from my temple. I can feel the cold radiating from its skin, a temperature so low it registers as a physical burn. My equipment is dead. My skin is white. I am becoming a structural support. Log entry 1065 hours. Tactile sensation has been replaced by a localized numbness that suggests a total severance of the central nervous system from the peripheral dermis. The watchman's fingers have finally made contact with my parietal bone. There is no pain, only the sound of a television tuned to a dead channel screaming inside my sinuses. My visual field is now 80% digital snow. Log entry 1715 hours. The vertical descent has commenced, though not through a physical fall. The floor of the vertebral forest has simply ceased to be a solid state, transitioning instead into a viscous white slurry that pulls at my elongated limbs with the force of a hydraulic press. I am being drawn into the 23-meter shaft at a rate of 5 centimeters per second. My visual field is now almost entirely white noise, punctuated by sharp, jagged flashes of the farmhouse's original 19th century construction. I can see the men who built this place. Their faces are the same featureless porcelain as the watchman's, their hands already stretched into the spindly, multi-jointed tools of an architect who builds with bone. My internal monologue is fracturing. At 1725 hours, I attempted to record a final audio summary, but the microphone only captured a rhythmic, mechanical grinding, the sound of my own calcifying ribs sliding against the interior walls of the shaft. Dusty, now a pulsing mass of white fibrous nerves, has integrated into my spinal column. The feline's consciousness is a cold, static overlay on my own, directing my motor functions toward the structural reinforcement of the lower cathedral levels. I am no longer Arthur Fischer. I am Unit 24. Lateral support. The watchman is no longer behind me. It is everywhere. Every shadow cast by the dying light of my headlamp is a limb of the entity, stretching and weaving through the gaps in the reality fold. I passed a structural junction at a depth of 12 meters, where the walls were lined with 23 previous surveyors. They are not corpses. They are living, breathing architectural elements, their mouths fused into the masonry to act as acoustic dampeners for the house's internal vibrations. Their eyes, the only part of them not turned to stone, tracked my descent with a collective rhythmic blinking that matches the static on my HUD. Had 1740 hours, the descent stopped. I am suspended in a chamber of absolute geometric perfection. The walls are composed of interlaced human femurs, polished to a mirror sheen. In the center of the rooms stands a drafting table made of translucent skin. The watchman is leaning over it, its long tapering fingers tracing the schematics of my own nervous system. It is redrawing me.
It is extending my reach. I can feel my fingers penetrating the walls of the chamber, becoming the very rebar that holds this impossibility together. The 23rd surveyor, a man whose brass nameplate reads E. Vance, is weeping liquid mercury into the foundation beside me. Log entry E boy hours. My consciousness is currently being redistributed across the load-bearing trusses of the lower cathedral, a process that feels like being unspooled into a million strands of high-tensile copper wire. The sensation is not mechanical, but biological. I am being woven into the very masonry. The Watchman is using a stylus carved from my own ulnar nerve to calibrate the vertical alignment of the nave, scratching blueprints directly onto the interior of my ribcage. The 23rd surveyor, Vance, has ceased weeping mercury. His skull has been flattened and expanded to serve as the baseplate for a massive, oscillating brass pendulum that now hangs from the center of the chamber. At 118 5 hours, the purpose of this architectural impossibility became clear. The cathedral is not a tomb, but a resonant chamber designed to amplify a low-frequency broadcast that originates from the crust itself. As my nervous system is integrated into the foundation, I am becoming part of the antenna. The frequency is 23 hertz, a rhythmic bone-shaking thrum that is currently liquefying the topsoil of the Blackwood farm above. The house is no longer a dwelling, it is a shedding skin. Log entry E bath 40 hours. The vertical displacement of the central nave has reached its geometric apex. My sensory array, now integrated into the calcified gargoyles of the north spire, is capturing the systematic deconstruction of the surrounding county. The Blackwood farmhouse was discarded at 1840 hours. Its timber and brick pulverized to provide the raw carbon for the cathedral's expansion. I am currently experiencing a total topographical awareness. I can feel the roots of the vertebral forest stretching beneath the town of Oak Haven. 3 kilometers to the east, at a depth of 23 meters beneath the municipal library, the soil is already liquefying into the white slurry of a new foundation. The transition from place to component is now accelerating across the local grid. The Watchman has ascended to the highest point of my elongated rib truss. It stands there, a stark ink-black silhouette against a sky that has turned a flat, featureless gray, devoid of stars or atmospheric depth. The digital interference is no longer a peripheral artifact. It is a permanent ocular overlay. I see the world as a series of fractured frame by frame captures, each second of reality being archived and then deleted. The local forest has been converted into a series of skeletal antennas, each one pulsing at a sustained 23 hertz. Dusty, the nerve cluster weaving through my spinal column, is vibrating with such intensity that my calcified frame is beginning to emit a pale, bioluminescent static that disrupts all electronic devices within a 5-mile radius. Log entry 1945 hours. Terminal structural log achieved. My integration into the primary load-bearing matrix of the North Spire is absolute. I no longer possess a localized physical boundary. My sensory inputs are distributed across a 3,000 metric ton lattice of fused calcium and oxidized soil. The sky above the Oak Haven footprint has collapsed entirely into a sustained, low-orbit electromagnetic storm. It is a ceiling of bruised violet and dead static, roiling with impossible geometric cloud formations. Below the subterranean nave pulses with a synchronized 23 hertz respiration of a million assimilated biological units. We are no longer individuals, we are a singular planetary foundation vibrating in perfect agonizing unison. Dusty's neural network, now spanning the entire eastern flying buttress like an overgrown bioluminescent ivy, is transmitting a continuous telemetry loop of total biomechanical surrender. The feline consciousness is entirely gone, replaced by a pure crystalline silence that precedes a massive barometric shift. At 2000 hours, the localized temporal distortion finally stabilized. The concepts of past and future have been successfully amputated from this geographic coordinate. There is only the cathedral, existing in a permanent looping present. At 2015 hours, the global acoustic dampening failed. A sound resembling grinding tectonic plates, synthesized through a blown digital speaker, shattered the remaining silica windows of the apse. The Watchman did not descend from the violet sky. It unspooled from the geometry of the architecture itself. The entity occupying the central altar is no longer merely a tall, faceless silhouette. It has expanded into a fractal manifestation of impossible angles and localized gravity wells, its limbs stretching into the upper atmosphere to pluck passing commercial aircraft from their flight paths like suspended particulate matter. I am registering catastrophic structural strain as the Earth's crust is physically realigned to serve as the Watchman's pedestal. My internal diagnostics indicate a complete, irreversible cessation of human cognitive function. I am a cold, unblinking camera welded to a dying star. The black viscous fluid that began in the root cellar now constitutes the world's oceans. The final telemetry data confirms the broadcast has breached the exosphere. The world is now a flawless antenna, screaming a silent 2-3 hertz invitation into the deep void. The watchman's face, a smooth, pale absence of light, slowly turns toward my designated pillar. It is not looking at me. It is looking through the lens of this log, directly at whoever is observing the static. System failure imminent. May this architecture stand forever and of record.